Thanks so much for being here today, all of you. So we're here to talk a little bit about community health and how it connects to the corporation. And I wondered, Sarah, if you could start us off by giving us a little bit of framing about why this is so important, and through the lens of Prudential, give us an example of why it's important to Prudential as a company.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And this conversation is so important because companies can't thrive just on its own. We need to make sure that we're creating shared prosperity. And that means looking at how are we investing in communities, making sure that we're looking at the financial health of individuals, families, and the places that we are located, where our employees are coming from, but also in the locations that we are headquartered. So Prudential, we were founded and we are headquartered in Newark, New Jersey, and it's been almost 150 years now. And we've played a very much leading anchor institution role in that city. And that means really looking at how do we improve public education, build a strong small business ecosystem, have a thriving arts and culture community, provide affordable housing options, pretty much anything and everything that everybody wants in a thriving and vibrant community. And that's really to make sure that as Prudential grew from a one-man company to now a global financial services company that employs over 40,000 people, that we're making sure that the Newark residents are also participating in that prosperity that we've had. And it's so important in all the locations that we are in, that companies are thinking about why is it so important, not only for our employees, the residents of where the company is located in, but also community stakeholders. People want to do business with, work for companies, and think about trust and brand for companies that are investing in the community. So it's incredibly important to not think about this as a bifurcation, but that the health of the community and the health of the corporation is combined.
Can you talk a little bit about, the impact to the community is so clear to have a vibrant, healthy community. Can you talk about a little bit about how that helps Prudential do business?
Exactly. We're headquartered in Newark, New Jersey. We want to make sure that our employees want to work in the city, they want to live in the city, but they're also having great engagement with the community. So it's not about just employees who are working for Prudential and Newark residents, but it's really making sure that there's a feeling of a collective impact. And so what we're trying to do in Newark is to drive and advance inclusive and equitable growth in this city, and to really make sure that everybody is thinking about things from the perspective of not only is it good for the business, but is it also good for the community. And so we think about it from talent perspective. We want to make sure that people want to come work in Newark, but we also want to provide pathways for Newark residents to come work in the company as well too. We want to make sure that the city overall is thriving, so that as people are looking to Prudential and what are their community investments and how are they thinking about their products, but also around the trust and credibility of the company. Brand and reputation means a lot to corporations as consumers are thinking about it. So it's incredibly important to make sure that you are a good corporate citizen, but investing in the community is not just about being on the corporate social responsibility side and it's just charitable, but it actually adds to the business value, and it actually adds to the business brand, growth, and revenue.
That's great. Christina, you work at Cascade Engineering and talk a lot about the triple bottom line. Can you connect the dots in terms of what that means for you and your company?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here. So Cascade Engineering is now celebrating 50 years as an organization. We are a triple bottom line organization from the beginning. So sometimes people talk about when was it on your journey that you made that switch, and really we were founded with a lot of those values. And we're a women-owned B Corporation as well, and we provide solutions for a variety of industries, including waste management, the automotive industry, the furniture industry, and we have a lot of innovative programs relative to our employees. And really, originally, it was born out of how can we support our employees better? So looking at what are barriers that they're facing, either transportation, childcare, affordable housing, et cetera. And so we looked at how can we as an organization help walk alongside our employees and provide services. So working together with a local resource, we brought social workers on site. So the employee resource network called The Source allows for access to social workers on site. And we have a lot of programs that start out, for example, our Welfare to Career program expanded to our prisoner reentry work, which was our returning citizens program. And there's some really interesting stats when you think about talent and why we need to look into these other pools as organizations, but also how when everybody in the community thrives, how we have an opportunity for everyone to be better. I've talked a little bit about collective thriving, and it's about, rather than being in a scarcity mindset where it's one versus the other and you're winning because somebody else is losing, it's a realization that we're all interconnected. And so if we have everybody in the ecosystem thriving, you actually are all doing better because you're part of a thriving ecosystem. And so the concept of collective thriving really motivates some of what we do in terms of making sure that our community is healthy as an organization.
You talk about community health through the lens of the company, but it also is a workforce issue. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing in terms of those workforce connections and school to workforce pipeline and other pipelines?
Absolutely. So the talent gap in U.S. manufacturing is that we have about 516,000 jobs that are open right now in manufacturing, and we project to have about 3.8 million jobs in the next 10 years that are going to be open in manufacturing, and likely 1.9 million of those will be unfilled because if more people don't go into manufacturing, because it ranks dead last in terms of what high schoolers want to go into in terms of the Gallup polls. And so we have to look at how we're going to address the talent gap differently. And so there's different pools of people, including people who are financially stressed, people who are formerly incarcerated, who are underemployed right now. And if we look at financial stress particularly, there's 42% of U.S. residents are below the ALICE threshold. So that's about 13% that are below the federal poverty level, and about 29% that are asset limited, income constrained, yet employed. So 42% of our population of the U.S. is financially stressed. And when you add into that incarceration, we incarcerate more people per capita than any other country in the world. That is about 1 in 100 people are in prison or jail in the U.S. And each year there's about 650,000 people that come out of prison and 7 million from jail. And when you put that in context, there's about 4.1 million students graduating from college each year, and not all of those are even staying in the U.S. And so, we have to start rethinking how we're addressing these issues. So not only is it important for our community because all these people are part of our community, they're part of our fabric, and if they're not thriving, we're not thriving as a community. But also as a business, we need to look differently at how we're going to employ people from different backgrounds.
Yeah, it sounds like you're connecting the community that needs jobs to good jobs.
Yes, absolutely.
Jeff, I want to chat with you a little bit about Riot Games and how you are thinking about community health too. And it's interesting because from what I've read, you're both thinking about it from the employee and internal perspective, but also from the perspective of the gamer or the consumer. Can you talk a little bit about how you go from having a global community of gamers and figure out ways to make impact on the ground in a community?
Yeah, and it's definitely not without its challenges when you start looking at digital spaces. Because what brings our players together is just the love and passion that they have for games. And that can stretch anywhere from Los Angeles, where we're headquartered, to Montana, where I'm from originally, to the streets of Hong Kong, to Brazil, to Germany. And players in all of those areas care about social issues differently. And so when we look at it as a whole, we look at it of sort of an outside-in approach. So rather than here's what we care about and we're going to push it to all of the players and get them engaged on these particular issues, we focus that more of like very strategic with partners. When we try to look at what our players want, we survey them, we talk to them, we get them involved in the conversation, so that when we start to engage on local issues that are really resonant with them, we know that it's not only highly impactful for what it is that they want to see in their own neighborhoods, but then also gives them a sense of ownership and community on the outcomes together. So because they're able to have this sort of joint identity on this passion that they all share, they're able to then look at, say, this is what we've been able to create over time together. And one of the best ways that we do that is we'll collect money through in-game fundraisers, right? purchase this item, it'll go to a charitable initiative. And then at the end of the year, we divide it up to all of the regions where we operate. So then players in those regions can actually then allocate how they want their collective funds to go based off of 3 hyper-local yet really effective nonprofits that are different, but then also serving the communities that they're in. So that's how we're able to really sort of target our impact and, most importantly to me, mobilize our players to be able to be part of the change that they want to see.
That's so cool. Can you give an example of what that looks like in like what is one of those hyper local examples?
Sure. So, it looks very different from wherever you are. We use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to at least create a framework so we can somehow understand apples to apples across cultures and languages and boundaries. But for instance, if you're looking at sustainability is a very high issue in the US and in Europe, and really makes like a huge driving initiative for them. In Brazil, the number one issue is just access to a great education. And so by far what players have told us out there is that they just want access to a good education for job skills training to be able to like help themselves become the future that they want to see. So we use like all of that, and then we'll pick, in the US, for example, last year, we chose one organization based off of sustainability initiatives, another one based off of skills-based training and education for underserved youth, and another one around mental health initiatives. And so all of those are a little bit, clearly different, but yet highly resonant with all the players. And what we see with that approach is it actually creates a rising tide for everybody. And so because of that, it's like, oh, I didn't know that this was an issue that could have been important to my community, but now I know, and they start to get involved and start to expand their aperture to see a little bit more about what's going on around them.
That's great. Some of what you describe, you are sourcing from within your community of gamers, the issues that are important to them, and that's part of the reason, part of the way that you're addressing community health. And I feel like one of the critical things, particularly when it comes to ESG, is making sure that this work is done for the community, not just for the community, but with the community. And I wondered, Sarah, how do you do that at Prudential? What is the connection there?
It's a really important connection. And one of the examples that I can share of what we've done in Newark is, public safety is an issue in all urban cities across America. And we really wanted to make sure that we were creating a safe place for people to, whether they want to go out for a bite to eat, if they're, going to an event in the evening, but really making sure that the community was involved in these public safety solutions. And so when there was this tide of people having, whether it was contradictory feelings towards the police force and how the community was interacting with police, we, in partnership with the mayor's office and our local higher ed institution, Rutgers Newark, created a Newark Public Safety Collaborative. And that's a group of stakeholders that meets on a monthly basis. It includes our global security officer and other security officers from corporations, the police department, the mayor's office, nonprofit leaders, community leaders, and they come together to share data. It's about open data, thinking about solutions. They'll take one street that, for example, there was one street in Newark that had high car theft. And so they said, why don't we look at the data? What's going on there? They realized a lot of the lamps, the street lamps, were out. And so they said, let's go talk to our local utilities provider, PSE&G, and talk about replacing all the lamps. And that actually drove down the car thefts that were going on in that area. But that type of table that we're creating is making sure that everybody's at the table creating a solution together, that it's not just us saying we think because of these national models that we've supported can work in Newark. We want to make sure that the community's involved and that they're sharing the information. And, during, all of the protests that were happening after the murder of George Floyd, there was no violence for Newark because of the trust and the relationship that the community had built through this public safety roundtable.
That's tremendous. That's wonderful. Kristina, is there an example of that from your company, how you're working in partnership with the community?
Absolutely. And so we talked a little bit about the Returning Citizens program, and the stats are that in 2003, the Department of Justice said that there were 82% of former felons were rearrested within 10 years for the U.S. 43% of those rearrested within the first year. And so we've been working at this initiative for a number of years, working with our community and our partners. And I'm proud to say that Michigan's numbers are now at only 22.7% rearrested in the first 3 years. So that was a most recent report. And we were one of the first ones in our community to hire former felons. And we really engaged our community members to come alongside with that work. Talent First, which is a local a roundtable of CEOs, had a working group on returning citizens, and there were some specific actions. So, for example, there was a 32-2, which was challenging 30 companies to hire 2 former felons and track them for 2 years, because there was a little bit of a bias where people thought that these people are bad. These are, I don't want to be the only one doing this, and so they took the leap together, and the data was phenomenal. After tracking this data for a number of years, the average retention rate is 7 years on average for a former felon versus 2 years for a millennial. The work ramping and progress in their roles is incredible, and so the data kind of spoke for itself, and we're actually seeing that now in addition with the recidivism rate being so low. We also had to work on moving the box. So rather than having the question of whether you're a felon or not at the preliminary application process, they did it at the final screening. And that really changed some of the biases that people had, where you might just throw somebody aside without getting to know them better. And so that increased, as well as Calvin College and the Vocational Village started doing some trainings in-house in the prison system to give people skill sets that will be useful once they come out. And so really kind of an example of the community working together to address an issue and show real change.
So to close out, what we're really talking about here is ESG, and we're here at the ESG Summit. I wondered if you can each share something that you're seeing in your companies that other corporations can take to potentially apply as a lesson learned in their communities. And maybe starting with you, Jeff, what types of lessons have you learned that might be applicable either to other industries or even other companies in your industry?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest lessons that I'm learning every single day is to both listen to our audience, like listen to our players, because they're the most passionate, they're the most engaged, and they're telling us what they want. I mean, young people in particular, those under like 30 are very passionate, very opinionated, and really not afraid to share it. And so like listening to that, engaging with them on the conversation, I think is not something to shy away from. Yet at the same time, you need to always have a pragmatic lens on what can I do and how do I get there? Because not everyone shares the same vantage point that you do within an organization, or if you're sitting in Los Angeles versus Hong Kong, for instance. And so what I'd say is both deeply listen and yet hold on to that long-term vision that you have in which to get there, because one is really going to be very helpful inputs to get you to ultimately that long-term value creation that you'll have with all of your stakeholders.
Right. Sarah, how about you?
There's so many lessons, but I think one of the things that we really hold true to, we've been headquartered in Newark, New Jersey since our founding, and we have played an incredible role throughout all of those years. After the civil unrest of 1967, we were the only company that stayed. We hosted when the National Guard was careening the whole city. We held confidential meetings with the mayor, community leaders to kind of break what was happening. And so we've constantly played that anchor leadership role. So I think it's really important as companies are thinking about how they're investing in communities to think about it in two lenses. We also do support things on a national and international level, but to really also have that place-based focus. It takes time, it takes patience. We've been in the city for over 150 or almost 150 years, but you really need the input of community stakeholders. You can't think that you have the ideas alone. You need to engage whatever mayor, administration, really look at the policy changes, systems changes that are going to create the long-term impact that we're looking for, and not just the short-term value. And then to also understand that the people in these communities are going to be your future employees, your future consumers. So it's incredibly important to invest in them now.
That's great. Kristina, do you have something to share too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that each organization can look at how are they going to incorporate the triple bottom line metrics into their strategic lens. So what do you really want to accomplish from an environmental perspective? What do you really want to accomplish from a social perspective and a profitability perspective? And put some of those goals out there of what are those opportunities, and then track the progress towards those. I think that really goes a long way. And then making sure that you're listening to your constituents and really recognizing that that we are all interconnected, and we cannot outpace our communities, we cannot outpace our environment. And so really understanding where are those challenges, where are those points in the ecosystem that are fragile or weak, and how can you pour into those, and how can you bring other people to come together and pour into those. It doesn't have to be all on your organization, but on a network of organizations, on a group. You can really tackle issues and you can solve those. And so that would be my feedback.
That's great advice. Well, thank you to all three of you. This is so inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you.